Hey guys, welcome to another edition of the Best Practices Podcast. My name is Kirk Barron. I'm your host. It's the #1 podcast for just learning anything about dentistry, your practice, make your practice a little better and your life better. And I've got a crazy special show to you for you today, coming to you and some crazy special friends of mine. Some of them you know really well. And if you're joining us for the first time, I want to just welcome you to a community where we just never stop learning. It's about how can we all get better together. And if you are subscribing in any way to Google, Play or Stitcher or iTunes, whatever, I'm just going to ask you to subscribe so you can be a part of this every single week as we bring you a key opinion leader, a great thinker, somebody to try to make your life a little bit better. And keep sending us suggestions for shows, things that you guys want to see, relevant stuff to your practice, your team, whatever. And we take a ton of notes here. So I'm going to encourage you to come back to the show notes wherever you got this podcast from. So we'll list all the links, everything that's mentioned, and how to get in touch with the speakers, all that kind of stuff, because we want to just keep nurturing this community. And most importantly, I want to introduce you to two of my favorite people in dentistry of all time. And I think this is pretty cool because not only are you guys great friends, but we're going to be combining a lot of different things. And Bill, you mentioned before we went live here today, I'm kind of tired of talking about teeth. So I got my good friend, Dr. Bill Robbins and Dr. Kevin Groth. And so I want people, if they've been living under a rock and they don't know who you guys are, who is Bill Robbins and who is Dr. Kevin Groth?
You go first, Kevin.
I was going to say you go first, Bill, but respect your elders, so go for it. How about that?
Whoa, all right.
So I'm first. All right, so I'm a general dentist. I practice in San Antonio, and I have practiced in San Antonio for most of my adult life. I'm married. My wife and I have been married for more than 40 years. We've got 3 kids, 5 grandkids. My oldest daughter is a physician's assistant for a dermatologist. My middle daughter is an attorney, and my son, my youngest, is a second-year dental student here in San Antonio at the dental school. So I've got a very rich life, and actually that's what I'm going to talk about today. That the fact that I do have a rich life, but a lot of people look at me and think I'm the golden boy, and it's not necessarily true. I've had my challenges along the way too, so that's kind of where we're going to go today.
Love it. Love it.
Awesome. Tough to follow that, but my name is Kevin Groth. I'm a general dentist out of Detroit, Michigan, born and raised in Michigan my whole life. Never left. Unfortunately, the weather just isn't as good as what I would like it to be, but father's a dentist, uncle's a dentist, so just kind of followed suit with that. Happily married with a 2-year-old daughter, and she's keeping us quite busy, especially during COVID time, but it's been a great time. And looking at 2 icons that have really changed my life, Kirk, obviously through Act Dental, and now as of recent, Bill, I mean, you've changed my entire outlook of clinical dentistry on almost every facet. So I'm just very appreciative to be a part of this and happy to be able to jump on. And let's roll. Let's do this.
Yeah, let's do it. So guide us today, Obi-Wan, Bill, I've always enjoyed everything you've ever taught me, but let's talk about the why. I always like the why first before we get into the how. You've had a lot of time to reflect in dentistry. You've taught a lot of people. I mean, 40 plus years in dentistry. Why is this an important conversation today?
Yeah, I think the why of it is about the journey. It's not getting to the end. It's not where you are at the end. It's about the journey. And as I was, Kirk and I talked about doing this podcast a week or 2 ago, and I was kind of thinking what I want to talk about. And as he said, I'm just a little weary of talking about teeth. And this time I wanted to tell my story. And I don't tell it a lot. I tell his story occasionally, but not a lot. I don't think Kirk's ever heard it, and I think Kevin's heard a little bit of it. So with your permission, I'm going to jump into my story.
Yeah.
So my premise is that we were created to be happy. That's my belief. And so today is to some degree talking about that pursuit of happiness individually in our lives. And as dentists, if we're talking about happiness, a place that many people begin is with the Pankey Cross. And I'm going to assume that most of the people listening to this podcast are familiar with Dr. Pankey and one of his seminal teachings, Pankey Cross. And this is essentially what it was. At the center of this cross is a circle with the word happiness in it. And then there's 4 arms radiating out from the center of the cross. And it's love, work, play, and worship. Those are the 4 arms. And the premise that Dr. Pankey taught is the more that you can live your life in these 4 areas in balance, the more happiness you enjoy. Now, as I reflect back on this concept, having practiced dentistry for about 47 years, I think it's a little simplistic. And I do not necessarily ascribe to the simplicity of the Pankey Cross, but I think it's a good place to start this discussion. I mean, if you're a young dentist and you're starting a practice and you've got $750,000, $1 million worth of debt, living your life in balance, I think, is something that's it's difficult to do, number one. And number two, is it even appropriate? Because we go through passages in our lives, and when we're in certain passages, we have to sacrifice in some areas for others. But I'm not really here to discuss the Pankey Cross in any great detail, except that it's a good way to jump into the concept of happiness. Another concept that I really enjoyed, unfortunately, I never heard Dr. Pankey speak live, so I'm only talking about what I heard from his students that taught me. He said, if you look at 100 dentists in the United States, 2% are masters. And we all know what a master is. I mean, that's that 1 or 2 amazing dentists that you can think of in your life that do everything well. I think it's almost impossible anymore to be a master as a general dentist because there's too much. I have one friend, his name is Brian Schroeder, and if there was such a thing as a master general dentist, I think Brian is that person. But by and large, it's essentially impossible. The next group that Dr. Pankey talked about, he called them adept. And adept is just a fancy word for really good. And he said 2% are masters, 8% are adept, 36% are students, and 54% are indifferent. So essentially what Dr. Pankey said is that half of dentists are really trying and the other half aren't. Now, I don't know if the numbers are right or not, but let's just assume that there's some validity to them. The people that I run with are always in the 50% that care. Nobody comes to listen to me speak if they don't care. So the 50% of dentists that don't care are not really on my radar. So using those 2 premises about the cross and the breakdown of dentists, I want to just briefly give you my story. So I grew up in Little Rock, Arkansas. My father was a dentist, as yours, Kevin. My grandfather was a dentist, and my 2 uncles were dentists. And so I grew up in a dental family. So that's what you do when you go to college, and after you go to college, you go to dental school and you become a dentist. And back in those days, our home and our office were in the same building. So I lived upstairs and the office was downstairs. And so I spent all of my formative years hanging out with my dad, who was just an amazing human being, both in the office and out of the office. And I loved him, and his patients loved him. And so I grew up with this concept of dentistry is a great way to make a living because everybody loves you. When I was in dental school and I would be in his office in the summer and he'd be out of the operatory, patients over and over again would say, "Son, you going to dental school?" And I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "If you're half the dentist your dad is, you'll be a hell of a dentist." And I heard that so many times growing up. They just loved him. And so when I went to dental school in Memphis, which is only about a 2.5-hour drive from Little Rock, I just assumed that I would go back to Little Rock and practice with my father. That's what you did 50 years ago. You go to dental school, you go back home, there's a place in the office, and you go to work. I knew that's what I'd do. And when I was a junior dental student, one day we were talking, he said, "I've been reading about this thing called an internship, a dental internship, and I think you ought to do one." And I said, "I don't know what that is." This is back in 1972. I graduated in 73. He said, "Well, you go to a VA hospital and you apply." And I said, "Well, what do you do?" And he said, "They've got a dental service there and you learn everything they can teach you in a year. And then when you're ready to come back to Little Rock, you can come back." And, back in those days, you did what your dad told you to do. So I went over to the VA in in Memphis, and I applied. And I didn't get into the one in Memphis. I got in one in Leavenworth, Kansas. And so I went to Leavenworth, Kansas, which was the center of the dental universe back in those days. It was an amazing dental service. They had every specialty residency at that VA hospital. And it was associated with UMKC Dental School. So it was a mecca of education. And I just loved it. I learned so much. And when I was in the perio rotation, at the end, I wanted to be a periodontist. And when I was in the oral surgery rotation, I wanted to be an oral surgeon. So I went through all of that first year. And I wanted to be all those different specialists for 3 months, and then I wanted to be another one. And back in those days, you had to pay your time back for the residency. And so I paid a second year back for the first year that I did my internship. And during that second year, I decided that I wanted to do more. And so I applied to and was accepted to a 2-year general practice residency in San Diego at the VA there. So I went to San Diego. I did the 2-year program there, and it still informs everything I do in dentistry. It was the 2 most important professional years of my life for sure. And when I finished it, I had to pay back those 2 years, and I had to go somewhere, and they were going to send me to another VA hospital. And there were 2 second-year residents, me and one other guy, and as luck would have it, I was the better resident. And so I got first choice. And there were 5 places you could be sent, 5 hospitals that were open, and 4 of them were really bad, and one of them was the VA in San Antonio, which was really good. It was a brand new hospital. It had a brand new GPR program there. It had a brand new dental school across the street. And so it was an easy decision. So I moved to San Antonio. By that time, I was pretty much sucked into academics because I loved those 3 years of my residency program. And soon after I got to San Antonio, I became director of the GPR as a fairly young guy. And by that time, I was absolutely sucked into academics, and I was not to return to Little Rock to work with my dad. And I've always been, I've appreciated my parents for so many reasons, but one of the reasons I appreciate my dad so much is because he gave me a path. He gave me the opportunity to spread my wings, and I didn't even know I needed to do that. And he gave me the opportunity, and he would have loved for me to have come back and practice with him, but it never happened because once he gave me the freedom to pursue my desires, it moved me into the academic world. And so when I finished my residency program, I was full of spit and vinegar, and I thought I was pretty hot stuff. And it was about that time I learned about the Pankey Cross, and I learned about the 4 different levels of dentistry. And I wanted to be a master, absolutely. I had the training. I wanted to be a super dentist. I wanted to do it all well, and that was my goal. And I still wasn't married at this point, so I had the time to do it. And after about 3 or 4 years of pursuing that, it became clear to me that I had neither the skills nor the intellect to be that person. I just didn't have it to be a super dentist. And so I decided I was going to make it more narrow. It was going to be more of a perio-restorative super dentist was my goal. That's what I was moving towards. And so I then, at that point in my life, got married. And soon after I got married, we started having kids, and I was still real committed to dentistry. I was the guy that went in early and stayed late. And when you run a residency program, that's what you have to do. I mean, you're doing lit reviews early in the morning, you're doing treatment planning afterwards in the evening, you get home, you're with the kids and you eat a while, and then you read some literature, and then you go back and do it again the next day. And so that was my life for quite a number of years. And after I was in the VA for about 5 years in San Antonio, I decided to join the Air Force. I had wanderlust. I wanted to go live in Europe. I got a guaranteed assignment to Germany. And so my wife and I moved to Germany for 2.5 years and just had the time of our lives. And then we moved back to San Antonio, and I taught in the 2-year AGD program at Lackland Air Force Base. So that was my second academic position. And after that, I then left the Air Force and went to the dental school full-time in San Antonio and became director of the AGD program at the dental school. So the first 25 years of my life, I was in academics. And during that time, I was committed to academics. And in 1994, I received the highest award that a teacher at the dental school in San Antonio can get. It's a health science center with 5 different colleges. And I received the Presidential Teaching Award. And it was, it was a wonderful honor, and it was a big deal. Even with cash went with it. And I'll never forget the day I received the award. I was sitting on the front row in a big auditorium full of people, and the 5 deans of the 5 colleges were up there introducing their individual, and then it was my turn. The dean of the dental school got up and started talking about me. And I'm sitting on the front row. My mother is on one side, my wife is on the other side, and my children are then fanned out between, on either side of them. So I'm sitting there all puffed up, and the dean is talking about what a great teacher I am and how much impact I've had on dentistry and blah, blah, blah. And this was one of the seminal moments in my life. I'll never forget, I turned to the right to look at my wife, and she was so angry with me, she wouldn't even look me in the eye, because what the dean was saying just confirmed in her mind what she knew. And that was that I was an amazing dental school teacher and I was a lousy husband and father. And, you know, that day is perhaps one of the few most important days of my life. And it has nothing to do with the award. The award has no meaning, but the look in her eyes and the fact that she wouldn't look at me still haunts me to some degree today. And if she were here today and you ask her, by the way, she's just about 20 yards from me right now. She's working today. So she's a hygienist and she's seeing patients while I'm in here having fun. And if she was here today, she would laugh if you ask if I'm doing better. And she would say, yeah, he's doing better. You know, he's not necessarily great, but he's doing better than he used to. So I want to talk a little bit about the happiness issue that Dr. Pankey shared with us. And the whole issue of happiness for me is somewhat related to my view of the world. And Kevin and Kirk, you both know me pretty well, and you know that I'm a glass half full kind of guy. My view of the world is a very positive view. I feel like I've had the sun over my head my whole life. And so I've got a very positive outlook on life. However, I'm not happy all the time. Remember, we talked about Monday mornings. I don't love Monday mornings in the dental office. I don't like them at all, as a matter of fact. And so as I've reflected in my adult years about happiness, I've tried to think, who is the happiest individual that I know that I spend time with? And the answer is very easy for me. It's my dog. Her name is Lulu. Actually, her name is Lulabelle, but we call her Lulu for short. And Lulu is happy all the time. So I can get up on Monday morning with a somewhat negative attitude, and Lulu comes running up to me and goes, hey, Dad, you know, what day is it? And I go, it's Monday. And she goes, yeah, it's Monday. And then she goes, so what are we going to do today? And I said, well, you're going to hang out in the crate all day with your brother and sister. She goes, yeah, that's perfect. What's for breakfast? And I'm going to say, it's the same diet dog food you've been eating for the last 10 years. Oh, I love that. So, I mean, no matter what you do, everything is great with Lulu. And so she has become my model of happiness because she's happy all the time. All right, so I want to segue to another concept that came to me about more than 20 years ago. I was listening to a lecture by a woman named Jill Bolte Taylor. Have you heard of her, either of you?
No, not at all.
Okay, so she is a neuroscientist from Harvard. And in 1996, one morning, she woke up and she was having a stroke. So you've got a neuroscientist that lives by herself and she's having a stroke. And she realizes she's having a stroke, but she can't do anything about it. She doesn't have the skills, the wherewithal to pick up the phone. And so she is watching this happen to herself over about 4 hours. And finally, somebody finds her. She finally mumbles something into the phone, and a friend comes and gets her and takes her to the hospital. But the cool part of the story is that she's observing what's happening to her through the eyes of a neuroscientist. So what happened is she had a brain bleed in the left brain. And the left brain is the executive part of the brain. That's the one that makes all the decisions, that helps us know what to do every day, tells us where to be on time. The executive brain makes decisions all the time for us based on what's already happened in the past and what's going to happen in the future. So that's the executive side of the brain. The right brain is the intuitive side. It's the feeling side. Well, it turned out that her stroke was in the left side. And so over the next 4 or 5 hours, as her left brain was completely shutting down, she was feeling an amazing sense of bliss. And she shouldn't have been feeling bliss because she knew at some level that she was dying. But for some reason, she had this overwhelming feeling of bliss. And she came to realize it was because the blissful side of your brain is the right side. And when your left side slows down or stops completely, it allows the right side of the brain to start, speaking to you, because the left brain always shouts out the right brain, at least in the busy Western world that we live in. So over the next 8 years, as she healed from this stroke, she chronicled all of the things that were happening through the eyes of a neuroscientist. And she had this voice that she called the mean little voice that was in her head. And it turns out that we all have this mean little voice. It's the one that judges the person because they're smoking a cigarette, or it judges the woman because she's a little overweight. That's that mean little voice that we all have at some level. And what she realized is that mean little voice lives in the left brain. And when the left brain, in her case, was knocked out, the mean little voice went away. And so it allowed the gentle nature, the loving nature, the intuitive nature, the blissful nature in her life to come out. And so for many, many months after the stroke, as she was recuperating, it was a very difficult recuperation for her. But during that time, she was still in this blissful state, amazingly. But then, as you might expect, as the brain healed, the mean little voice started coming back. And it started talking to her again. And she came up, the name of her book, I've written it down. The name of her book is My Stroke of Insight. And her last name is Taylor, Jill Bolte Taylor. It's an excellent read. And what she came to realize is that she had control of that little voice. In other words, she didn't have to let it do that. She had just lived with it before the stroke, like we all do, and just assumed that it's a normal part of living, and that's the way we are. But when she lived without it for a year, and then it started creeping back, she realized that she had the control, that she didn't actually have to listen to it, and she learned to control it. So that takes me back to Lulu. So as I think about Lulu, I wonder if in the dog world, there is no mean little voice, because it doesn't seem, in my experience with dogs, that they have that same mean little voice that we tend to have in our heads all the time. And so that book had a really significant impact on me as I was looking at my life and reevaluating, because this is back in 1996 is when she had this stroke. And I got that award in 1994. So I was in a fairly reflective mood at the time that I read this book. And so back to the original issue, and that is being in the 2%. Well, did I make it? No, I never made it. I never made it to be a master, in that top 2%. But I've come to realize that that's not the point at all. And back in my days when I was teaching residents, which now is 25 years ago, I remember telling them, you owe it to yourself to be the absolute best dentist you can be. You've got the capability to do it because you're in this program. You are good enough to get in this program. You've got the responsibility to be the best you can regardless. And that's not my message anymore. When I'm talking to the residents at the dental school now, I'm no longer in charge of them, but I lecture to them. And I talk much more about this other reality. The reality is being a good dentist is one part of a great big picture. And yes, you do owe it to your patients that your margins of your crowns fit, but do you owe it to them that you're the best dentist in San Antonio or Texas? And the answer is no. I don't believe that's the case anymore. So that's kind of a quick overview of my story. And I've got to give a shout out to my wife, because she's the one that stuck it out with me through all those years when I wasn't as good as I should have been, even close to good enough. And I'm so grateful now to her for many reasons, but also she was the primary caregiver for our 3 children, all of which have turned out to be amazing human beings that get along with each other and get along with us. And we've got a wonderful family, and it's primarily because of her. Yeah. So I guess my message is dentistry is important. It's not that important. It's just teeth, and family is way important. So if you want to talk any at all about balance, the top of that balance continuum has got to be the family. So I yammered on a long time. I'm going to turn it back to you guys.
Well, first of all, I've spent hours and hours, and I've never heard that ever. So I'm so grateful to hear that. And we're all going to read the book, My Stroke of Insight. Sounds like great. Here's one of my questions too, though, is, we have these moments in our life. You'll never forget that look that she gave you. Let's talk about the application. So these are awesome concepts. I love it. And when you're young, like sometimes when you just feel the pressure of work and family, you kind of understand. How did you apply it? Like, if that moment was so big for you, take us through what happened after that moment.
Yeah, that was my question.
Yeah.
Definitely want to know that.
So, and besides all of this other stuff, right after we moved back to San Antonio, I was still in the Air Force, and I was about to get out of the Air Force and go to work at the dental school. And I announced to her that I was going to go to University of Texas at San Antonio, UTSA, and get a master's in adult education in the evening classes. So not only was I doing all this dental school business, but now I'm going to go back to school and get a master's degree on top of it. And so it was all of that really was stoking the fire of her anger. But the problem was I was not in touch enough to realize how angry she was until that seminal moment. I knew we had our burns and all along the way, but I didn't realize the depth of her anxiety and how mad she was at me. So one of the things I started doing was taking off half a day, and it became the half a day that I would do things with the children and her. Now, I know that doesn't sound like a lot. In this day and time, taking off a half a day, because people only work 4 days a week now anyway, most people. And so taking off a half a day doesn't seem like a big deal now, but back then it was a big deal. I was teaching at the dental school, and taking a half a day off wasn't easy. So that was the first thing I did. And when I did that one thing, that one half day off, it totally changed the dynamic, because she saw that I was serious. She knew that this wasn't necessarily, I wasn't changing who I was, but I was at least making what appeared to be somewhat of a sacrifice to be leaving my job at the school for half a day a week to come and hang out with the family. So I'd say that was the first time when she started to believe that maybe I was serious about this issue of trying to live in a little better balance.
But did you go into private practice then thereafter? Yeah. But wouldn't that have brought on its own set of issues of balance and trying to build a practice after being in academia for 25 years?
It's true, but here's the difference. The difference is that when I was at the dental school for a dozen years teaching, I was working from 7 to 7, and I was making a lousy living. And that was another thing that made her angry. So now I'm in charge of a family of 5, and we're not living very well because I'm not making very much money, but I'm spending all of my time there. And so when I floated the idea after a dozen years of teaching in the dental school and 25 years of academics in total, of leaving the dental school and going to private practice, she loved it. She was all in. And then we built this practice together from scratch. She was the office manager and the hygienist to start with. She continued to be the hygienist and the bookkeeper. My oldest daughter helped in the summers when she was home. So this was a family affair, and my wife has never been happier in our life than when she and I were building this practice together. So the private practice turned out to be a savior for us.
It's always so, and I love it. And if you ever meet Bill's wife, she's pretty special, and behind every successful man is going to be someone special like her and our wives. My other thoughts too is I want to know how you use this, or how you think about not only the Pankey Cross, but the left side and the right side of your brain, because I know we could all use a little dose of wisdom. There's instances that come up that maybe I'm having a good day. Maybe Lulu, you were taking on the persona of Lulu one day and then bam, something happens. How do you use this even now as you look at your practice? Now you're at a different stage, but how'd you use this out throughout your career?
Yeah, it's very little about the practice anymore. It's more about your life, how I live my life. I think the answer is that if you default to your normal life, it's going to be a left brain life. I think that's the takeaway message. Unless you do something to keep that from happening, that is the default position for Americans today. I can't speak for people in other parts of the world, but for Americans, that's where we default. And so how do we get where we're not in the left brain all the time? I mean, obviously we have to make plans. We got to think about why that crown failed, and we got to plan our next trip. So it's not that it's not appropriate to be in the future and the present. It's just not appropriate in the past. It's just not appropriate to be there all the time. And I think the answer is mindfulness. And we heard a fair amount about mindfulness during the COVID series. Quite a few people talked about different ways of mindfulness. I meditate in the morning. That's one of my ways. And the other is, I think, is literally paying attention. It's having some way in your life of daily paying attention to the right brain and listening to it. Because the right brain only works in one dimension, and that's the now. It only is about right now. It doesn't have anything to do with what happened yesterday and tomorrow. It's right now. And the more we can live in the now, the better. Now, I know I sound like I'm preaching, and I'm not really real good at this yet. I'm not a living in the past guy. I've never been in the past. I'm all about the future. So my challenge is to try to stay out of the future, what's coming up, and stay in the moment. And I think it's a never-ending thing that you have to be conscious. It's a consciousness issue.
So let me ask you, Kevin. So you're listening to Bill describe these concepts. How does it relate to a dentist? So you're 33, right?
Yeah.
Okay. What happens to you when you hear those concepts from a great man like Bill?
I think of you, because when I met you, you said the happiest people I know are have the simplest lives. And I think that that's just, I could tattoo that on you. I just know that that's what resonates from there. And I drastically changed everything about my life when I met you, and it's carried forward to this day. And you want to talk about balance? I do believe that one of my better sides of me is the fact that I do have a recognition of when I'm out of balance, and I make changes to it, and I'm very keen on that, and that one case would be when I got out of quarantine. Life was crazy. We were working nonstop. We were seeing all these patients and 4 hygiene exams and trying to cram everything in here. And we were very productive, but I didn't feel good. I didn't feel right. I felt like I was out of balance. And I came to you and you said, just take some days off. Just like you said, Bill, take a half a day off. Do whatever you need to do in order to clear your mind, get away and do some things intentionally, as opposed to just running the rat race that we're all used to. And what whoever dictated we're supposed to, work hard, play hard, whatever it is. But that's kind of my nature, is just the fact that I'm very keenly aware of when my right side is out of whack. I guess you would say that in this dialogue here, but I think it makes a huge difference when you can say, I make the rules. I can change this, I control this, and I don't have to have anybody dictating what we're doing with our lives. And it makes a huge difference in terms of happiness and doing what you want to do, as opposed to whatever has been said of how you should do, I guess.
Well, you guys have both said it. You talk about mindfulness and being aware, and sometimes you need the help of other people to help you see some things like that. I also want to reference what both of you said. Bill, you said, I don't like making this whole journey simple. And then Kevin, what you said, simple, let me just say this: simplicity is not easy. There's no relationship between simplicity and being easy. Simplicity, it's a constant battle. I think a better way probably for us to reference this is complexity is the enemy. Do you know what I mean? And just say that, because teaching, speaking, getting on planes, coming back, and there's something that drives anyone. If you own a dental practice, you're driven. If you went to dental school, you're driven. You're driven to something. So understanding that drive and going, hey, there's some things that made you what you are, but there's also some potential liabilities with the drive that you have, and having a great family and having a great business. They compete for time, they compete for energy, they compete for resources. And somebody's got to be, for the lack of a better word, kind of like a referee to understand like what's going on. Because I'll tell you, I know that look that Sarah has, and it's that. Have you guys ever seen the movie Full Metal Jacket? It's called The 1,000-Yard Stare, where somebody just burns a hole through you with a look, and you're like, oh, that's the look. Okay. And I'm certainly not good at this, because I'm going to have Sarah watch this, and she's like, you haven't mastered anything. So when we talk about adept, I don't even know if I'm in that category yet, but like there's a part of this learning that is so key, and you never master it. You never get there. And when you realize you're getting in trouble with the things that most matter with you, I think that's the key piece, because the anger can calcify. Do you know what I mean? It can calcify where they call it irreconcilable or whatever, to the point where, now this is terrible, and I'm going to say it, but I had a dentist say this, and I won't even tell you, but his wife said to me, she goes, I can't even stand the sight of his shoes. And I'm like, well, how did it get to that? So I think there's a certain point where we've got to be aware of like where we are at, pause, breathe a little bit. And my dad has said this, and I've heard so many people, look, you can choose to be right or married, but you can't be both, So, it's just something I use as a tool. Like, okay, I would prefer to be married in this whole process. And I'm probably saying way too much, but I want to I'm here to learn with you guys, and I love the left brain, right brain. And I know for one thing, because of the COVID, I could use a whole lot of a stroke of insight right now. I don't want a stroke, but like lessening of the left brain, because that's driving a lot of the decisions we make now. But I don't even know what to say other than,
I have a question, Bill.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think there were other moments that you missed prior to that award ceremony?
That's a good question. I'm sure there were moments every week that I missed. They were subtle, commonly, but not always subtle. I mean, I can't go back and now, I'm sure I could think of specific ones, and I'm sure Brenda could help me if I ask her to. But your point is, was I getting cues all along? And the answer is absolutely. And I wasn't paying attention to them. I was caught up in my academic life. That's not to say I didn't have some moral leadership in the home as the father. I did. I mean, I was a father in the home. But this whole idea of quality time, you hear people talk about, I'm not with my kids a lot, but when I'm with them, it's really good. It's quality time. That is nonsense, because you never know that specific moment when your daughter is in a mood to talk. And when she's in a mood to talk, you better sit down and cherish it, because it doesn't come all the time for most of our children. And I can remember some of those specific moments in my life when something special happened and I was in tune enough to enjoy it and be a part of it and keep my mouth shut and listen. But the point is, you got to be there for those times to happen. If you're just there occasionally, they don't happen. And so it isn't just about quality time. It's about a lot of time, I've come to realize. So yes, I think there were many times along the way that there were cues that I missed. And I'm just so grateful that she didn't give up, because there was a time when she could have and would have given up, but she didn't. And so, we weathered it, and we're in a great place right now. Probably is the best place we've ever been.
Right. I think with technology too, it's even harder to be present, because you have this thing in your pocket now. And you might miss that one moment that you're talking about that may have happened. You were present, but you were physically present, but wasn't emotionally present. I think that's a struggle of mine that I'm really trying to just ditch the technology as much as possible and get away from it, because you're missing out on that intentional time, right? And
yeah,
hard thing for our society right now.
The other side too, though, for me, the technology is not as big an issue as it is for you, because I don't care about it as much. I'm not that interested in Facebook and Instagram. Those aren't that interesting to me. And so it's not something that's difficult for me to give up, but my children are different. I mean, clearly my children are your age. And so I think it's more difficult for your generation, way more difficult than it is for mine, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, this is such an important conversation. I mean, we could almost have a conversation, or I could use some teaching every single week from from Bill and Kevin on all fronts on this as we try to improve our lives. Take us inside the brain of how do you use this in your practice? How did you use it talking to your team? You know, how did you use it just on a daily basis, even now, both of you?
You know, I don't know. You want to go first, Kevin? I've been sort of doing too much talking. You do it.
Oh, man, I think one thing personally I've really tried to be intentional about is saying no. I'm a yes guy. I say yes to everything, but I did realize that when I say yes to something, I now have to subtract something from my life, whether I know it or not. It's usually my wife and daughter. And that's like the worst thing to say no to them, right? But by saying yes to these opportunities, I think it subtracts from a lot. So I think there's nothing wrong with saying no. And I think that's important to recognize. I think it comes from a position of strength to say, no, I can't, you know, and I think that's important. But from a practice standpoint, I cut the number of days I work. I cut the hours I work. You know, I work 7 to 2, 9 to 3. You know, I do the ACT dental method. I work 165 days a year. And I fill that time still, but I find a lot of fulfillment and a lot of happiness based on simplicity of a bike ride with my daughter and wife, or a round of golf here and there, or whatever I need to do. And I think that's what really brings me joy. It brings me happiness. And I'm happy the fact that I've had mentors and people that have guided me along the way that told me this, instead of having to go through a crisis and then make these changes at 55 when I'm on my second or third marriage with X amount of kids and all that. So I'm just a lot of gratitude towards both of you for that, because I'm executing on what you've implemented or advised.
There's a ton of wisdom in what you just said about saying no. I don't know what percentage of dentists are please me people, not all of them, but most of my friends are. Most of the people that I enjoy hanging out with and be around, we're all please me people. And saying yes has been one of my downfalls for the 50 years of my career. So what you said is just brilliant. You're absolutely right. The ability to say no. And once again, if Brenda were sitting in here right now, she'd have a big laugh on her face, because she would say, you're not that much better at saying no now than you used to be. And you used to be pretty bad. So if you've got the skills to say no to really important things because you want to spend more time with really more important things, then you're well along on your journey. I think that's absolutely an important issue for sure. Saying no.
Yeah. Well, and then I'll ask you too, Bill, how do you use this on a daily basis? I love what Kevin had to say, but give me some thoughts as you work with your team, look at your practice, any other insights you have.
Yeah, I feel like I've given my team more than my family a lot of the time. And you know, it's different now. I sold my practice last year, so I'm no longer the boss. I still work here, but I'm no longer the boss. I'm no longer in a position of making decisions for the team, but I was for 25 years. And I feel like the old timers that have been here with me for most of that 25 years, I feel like every one of them would take a bullet for me, and they know I'd take a bullet for them. And so I don't know it's so much what you say, it's what you do. And you either back them up when a patient is rude to them. You know how occasionally a patient will treat you so nicely and blah, 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 and they go up and they're rude to the people at the front, or they're rude to the lady at the chair when you're not there. That's the time that you have an opportunity, and they watch to see how you handle that. You know, are you going with the patient, or are you going with them? And for please me people, it's really hard to confront a patient and say, you know, I'm sorry, but what you just said isn't appropriate in our office. I expect you to treat all of the people in this office the same way you treat me. And so I think, I don't know, I mean, I'm not answering it very well. You know, we start off every morning with a huddle. We have a monthly meeting. We have an appreciation time during the monthly meeting. One of the kind of things you teach, where you talk about why you appreciate the other people in the practice. We start off with a quote every morning. I tell everybody, be careful. It's dangerous out there. Let's go to work. And by and large, we've got a nice culture in our place. I mean, I break all the rules you teach. I walk the patient up to the front. I take my own photographs. So you don't need to be talking to me about practice management. I'm the worst on earth. I'm the worst.
Hey, we all need, this is why we create this. God created us as relational beings. And I don't know, I think this is an extra important message for me today because the pandemic has screwed me up. It screwed me up in a lot of ways. I mean, there's some blessings to it, but then there's also some scars that have happened. And I'm thinking about it in the context of what you've shared today is like, I'm so heavy into my left side of my brain, but the right is what makes me happy. Having people over, drinking beers. If you guys were my neighbors, I'd be kicking you out of my garage at 1 a.m, you know, and we would be laughing so hard we couldn't breathe. And I think a lot of us miss that. And I think what's happened, I'm only speaking from personal, is I've overcompensated by putting a lot of weight into the left because I can't do a lot of the right. But my treatment plan to myself is I'm going to start slowing down the left side of the brain as much as possible so I can get to the middle of that cross. And maybe some of the goals we had before aren't that important. I don't know if being a 2% master, 8% adept is even important at all. You know, it's like there's a couple rules, and you know, the challenge with everything is we don't give our best energy to things that matter most. So what a great message today. I love it. Any last thoughts or insights? I do want to talk about being together in a group. And, you know, I want to save that because I think, Bill, what you've done, not only for me personally, but a lot of other dentists is just being together in some type of a group or fashion. But what other thoughts or insights you guys have, Kevin or Bill?
Well, I think you just said what I would finish up, and being in the 2% or the 8%, I've come to believe isn't the key at all. You do need to be in the 46%. I mean, clearly you've got to be above the line, as Dr. Pankey would talk about. So you've got to be a student. And I think most of the time, and this is not self-deprecating, most of the time I'm a really good student. Occasionally I'm adept and I'm not a master. I'll never be a master. But some days I have really good days in my little specific areas that I'm good at, and I would consider myself to be adept. But day in and day out, I'm just a really serious student of dentistry. And I've come to believe that's good enough. As long as you're in that 46%, that's good enough.
I think it's to piggyback that, you know, especially with social media, you do the comparative elements, you see what other people are doing. And for a long time, I saw these experts on Instagram and whatnot, what the cases they're posting, and they seem like they have it all together. But then when you start actually diving in there, you see that the 2%, they're out of whack in some part of their life too. You know, they're not really necessarily living that balance, and they're working nonstop, and their family life, they don't talk about their family. And I became less and less inclined to follow them and more inclined to follow the people that have a balance of life and find that sense of purpose and passion and drive it in the happiness pathway, I guess you go down. So, I don't know. I love this story, Bill. I think this is such a remarkable thing, but I think we've all had, hopefully, you know, have someone in our back pocket, like a wife or a spouse or a partner that can call you out and kind of tear you down in the moment of recognition because you thought you were going to receive something really brilliant that day, and you did. It was just a hard lesson that you had to swallow, right?
Yeah, I got an award that day, but it was a different one than I expected, that's for sure.
I've had that moment too, you know, and I'm fortunate that I had that at a young age in my life, that it really turned everything around for me. And I'm very grateful for that. And I hope that other people that would be listening to found that inspiration and have somebody to call them out when they need to be called out, because I think it's so easy to shut your mouth and not make waves. And ultimately we do need to have that voice of reason come out at some point to change us.
Yeah, you can see why I love hanging out with these guys, because this is stuff that matters. And Bill, in full disclosure, if you're listening to this, I actually did not know what Bill was going to talk about. He just said, let's roll, and I'm going to share with you some things. And so while you're telling your story, I had a visceral reaction, and I'll share with you guys. I don't know even where I got this, but this came across my desk. Can you see my screen?
Mm-hmm. I love that. Yes, that's a great message.
I don't know where it came from, but it moved me. It moved me to the point where I had to read it a couple times. So I don't know if it's a post, but somebody shared this, and it's a bucket of baseballs with a note on the side. And I don't know if the guy put it at the end of the street, but it said, free. Hope someone can use these baseballs in the batting cages. I found them cleaning out my garage. I pitched them to my son. He and my grandson, countless rounds. My son is now 46. And what's it say? And my grandson is, years old. And my grandson is 23. I'm 72. And what I won't give to pitch a couple of buckets to them, they have moved away. If you are a father, cherish these times. You won't believe how quickly they will be gone. God bless. Give
that,
them a
my
hug.
friends, comes from the right brain.
Powerful.
Cool. It's hard to read that writing too. It's not just your your ability to read, Kirk.
It's just, yeah. Well, it could be a little bit of both, but it's a powerful message that keeps showing up, and the stuff that matters is really, Bill, you've given us some great framework, and Kevin, your context is tremendous. And I think we would miss the opportunity to talk about like how special it is just to be together. And Bill, you're not much of a self-promoter, but one of my favorite things I think that we've seen in any recent time come out of it is your study club, and your study club is special. I hear consistently from people all the time, like, I love being in Bill's study club. He cares, he helps me, he gives me perspective on things. And Kevin, you're on here, and we didn't even plan this, but you're actually a member of Bill's and Jim Otten's GDE study club. Just give us a little bit of perspective from your standpoint.
Yeah, I think I signed up first. I was honorary number one, maybe. I don't know, but I love it. And I haven't made a single live lecture, but I've watched recording after recording after recording, and it's changed the way I do treatment planning of cases, from a global diagnosis implementation with the gummy smile. But now I've thoroughly enjoyed Jim Otten's lectures on occlusion and function, because to me, that's my wheelhouse. I love listening to what he has to say and the little pearls he's bringing. And it's more or less just the community involvement that you guys bring in that makes it special to me, because everybody shares cases, and no matter how well it's documented or how poor it's documented, there's a lesson to learn that we can all learn from. And we have two of the best educators in the country or the world, and right in your fingertips, asking questions and delivering content that's just so remarkable. So to me, it's been the best thing to come out of COVID, is the relationship I've established with Bill and Jim. And to me, it's truly every single case, every single patient I look at, myself included now, I'm like, I might have some of this stuff that I never noticed before. So I can't emphasize global diagnosis education, the Friday morning study club, or the recordings that I do. But I've taken a lot away from it. I don't know how else I can promote it, but it's well worth the money. It's well worth the time, because you're going to take so much from that, whether it's, if you're a big treatment planner or not, there's something to be learned from, whether it's photography, materials, patient communication. I don't know. Go for it, Bill. I don't know if you could do a better job than that. So
yeah, tell us what it is. If people don't know what GDE is, how did it come together? What's the story behind it, and what is it now?
All right. So as Kevin mentioned, my partner, Jim Otten. Jim Otten is a wonderful restorative dentist in Lawrence, Kansas, and he and I have been friends for many years. And our paths have been very similar, although our practices aren't certainly exactly the same. Our view of the world is a little different. The emphasis are different, but he's got a really high-end restorative practice in Lawrence, Kansas. And a couple of years ago, we started talking about, because we were both sort of getting to the point where we're slowing down our practices, talking about some type of method to give back. And we didn't know if we were going to set up a consultation company or what. And we actually got together with our wives and we brainstormed for a weekend, and we wrote a bunch of notes out 2 years ago, but we never got it going. And when the COVID thing hit, and thanks to Kirk, I was involved in the COVID conference quite a bit. And it was at that point it hit me, this is the time. This is the time for us to do what we had talked about doing 2 years ago, and that was creating this study club. And so we launched it on June the 5th, and we meet every Friday for a couple of hour and 45 minutes. And we have gone over the global diagnosis information. We're now into occlusion. We've got lots of other stuff we're going to talk about. When we named it, we were trying to come up with a clever name for it. And I thought I had the name, because my name is Robbins and his is Otten. And if you put those together, it's rotten. And so I thought, let's call it Rotten Education. You know, that's what you've been getting your whole life as a dentist. So
good.
Get some more Rotten Education. And nobody liked the name except my son, who's a second-year dental student. He thought it was awesome. He was the only one. But Jim's wife and my wife, and nobody else liked it. So
New nickname.
we had to put rotten education aside, and we call it global diagnosis education. So it's not just global diagnosis. It's obviously, we're in occlusion right now. We're going to be moving into materials and rehabilitation and airway and, you know, all of those things that we're interested in. So we get together once a week, usually 3 out of the 4 Fridays. We meet from 9 to 11 Eastern time, and obviously it's online. And you know, we'd love for anybody that's listening to become a member. It's my favorite time of every week is the 2 hours I get to be with my GDE community.
Yeah.
I think one thing that's really cool about it is you combine a lot of different modalities and philosophies. There's not just one way of doing it. It's not the Dawson method. It's not the Pankey method. It's not the Spear Coist. I can see the different influences that I've had into this program, and I appreciate that because it's well thought out, and it's here are all these different ways of doing it. Figure out what works best for you. We're not telling you how to do something specifically, but there's many different ways to do it, and try them all out and see. So
the thing I'm really enjoying about it too is we've been going now since June, so I don't know, that's 4 or 5 months, and most of my life as a teacher has been, since I left the dental school, has been doing study clubs. So I'll fly somewhere and do a 5-hour lecture for a study club, and then I go home. And, you know, everybody goes, God, that was great. You know, I loved it. And then Monday, nothing happens. I mean, nobody can implement it because that's not the way people learn. They don't learn going to a 5-hour lecture. There has to be a continuation, number one, and number two, there has to be accountability. And the people that are really growing in this study club are being accountable to what we're asking them to do. We've got a template set up that shows them how to download photographs to make a presentation to the group. They don't have to present it, but they have to set it up, and then we can present it and discuss it. So I'm seeing those people that are really involved in the accountability part of GDE are growing, because we're seeing really amazing improvements in the quality of photography and the quality of thinking that goes into the treatment planning. So it's been very rewarding to see changes in behavior, because that's ultimately what I've always wanted. I don't want to just go out and talk. That's not what I want to do. I want to change behavior. I want people to incorporate these ideas into their practices. And it seems like this is the best platform for that I've ever been involved in, other than running a residency program, which is obviously a great way to do it.
Yeah, I highly encourage. If you're listening or watching, we're going to post a link to the GD study club, and you will just absolutely love it. People show up, they're engaged, and then Bill and Jim answer questions specifically. I mean, to learn from a master and have this at your fingertips, it's just incredibly valuable. So thank you guys for your contributions, not only to everybody else, but just to dentistry as a whole. So this is fun. And the first of many conversations, I think, to come on different topics. So I really enjoyed this today. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm leaving the office right now. I'm going to head home. I'm not kidding. I'm getting out of here. I had some things to do. I'm not going to do them now. I'm heading home. It's a beautiful day. So I appreciate you guys being on. So thank you guys both. Really, really appreciate you guys.
Loved every minute.
Thank you for all you do. Thank you for the COVID thing that got us all together. And Kevin, thank you for your friendship. It's funny, Kevin and I actually feel like we're really actually pretty close friends, and yet we've never met face to face.
I know, never met person.
Hey, I just have one thing. When you guys get together, I want to be invited, and we'll be at the bar. I mean, that's going to be a fun day.
Well, me and Kevin don't drink alcohol, but we'll come.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe we can go fishing then.
Yeah,
like you're going to do this week. And, you know what I mean?
yeah.
Actually, you're going to have to put the worm on my hook and everything, but we can have some fun doing that.
Yeah, man, good. Well, thanks, you guys. It's been a pleasure as always being with both of you. Really enjoyed
Enjoyed
it.
every minute, guys. This has been a blast.
It's been a blast. Well, stick around while we say goodbye to everybody else. Listen, thank you guys for tuning in to the Best Practices Show. If you enjoyed today, which I know you did, just do us a favor, hit the share button, share with your friends. Keep watching, keep sending suggestions, and as always, just take good care of your family, your team members, and your patients. And until we see you again, keep watching the Best Practices Show. You guys enjoy the rest of your day.